You want to eliminate this?
You've been eliminated.
Here we go. Today is Wednesday, February 24th, 2016, and this is episode 150 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. We're a little late.
Yeah,
We've had a busy couple of days.
it's my fault. I ended up having to
Well,
work the weekend.
It's kind of my fault too. I mean, I've got this silly wedding coming up, so I've been working out more. Not that it seems to help, but I've been going to the gym more, and I'm not a gym person, so I really have to force myself, and that just makes it harder to get everything else done.
Understand.
So, stupid life getting in the way of doing things that matter, like podcasting.
Gotta have priorities, man.
It's true. It's true.
But you're here. We're here now, so
It's true.
that's all that matters, right? So just before we get into the stories, a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So yeah, this there's a distinctive theme to this week's show, but we'll get to that in a second.
Underachieving like we normally do?
Yeah, well, that's not new.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to the theme in a second. So, first story tonight comes from scmagazineuk.com, and the title is Russian Bank Licenses Revoked for Using Hackers to Withdraw Funds. I thought this was pretty interesting and darn creative. So the allegation here, and there's really no spectacular technical details. I thought it was a very interesting concept that I hadn't really considered in the past, that apparently, if the allegations are to be believed, some banks in Russia are either cooperating with or commissioning cyber criminals to come in and steal money from their customers with the purpose of hiding potentially other crimes or inflating their bottom lines.
Those wily Russians.
They're creative. I mean, they're just ahead of the game, right?
It's like the Nigerians were, peak scammers. The Russians are they got crime down.
Yeah.
White collar organized crime, they are on the ball.
Right. They're taking everybody to school.
It's true.
Basically. So, I do wonder if there's this trend will spread. Because it's hard to, if you can transfer your losses somewhere else, right? And the average cyber attack probably never has a firm conclusion as to who perpetrated it.
Well, of course, it was a nation state out of Russia or China.
Well, exactly.
And occasionally North Korea.
So, if it was Iran or North Korea, you really aren't ever going to. It's never going to get closed. So,
right.
Just pay me my insurance money.
It's true.
Yeah. So there you go. All you enterprising, organized criminals. There's an idea for you.
It's clever.
Yeah.
I'm sure the various banking regulatory bodies around the world are going,
Yeah. What are we going to do about this?
Yeah. No, I mean, the bank had its license revoked, so clearly the Russian Central Banking Authority was not very pleased about this either.
No, and I do wonder, because they only revoked a certain number of bank licenses, I think 3. I do wonder if there was something, there's no detail in here, but I do wonder if there was something specific that they concluded with those 3 in particular. They do say that in the fourth quarter of last year alone, there was 1.5 billion rubles, which sounds like a lot, but it was $20 million, which is I guess a lot, but
I mean, for us little people, maybe not you.
well, I'm just saying in the scheme of a nation or a banking system, $20 million isn't
That's true.
a huge pot of money. Um, but I guess if that's the entirety of it, I do wonder how much these three particular banks were responsible for. Anyway, interesting. It's like the water skiing dog story right there. So.
So, complete aside, I'm highly amused on Twitter, by the way. Swift on security, which hopefully is well known by most folks in the security industry. If not, you should follow her, him, it, whatever. It's entertaining and good content. Anyway, she, her, him, it, whatever, has struck up an interesting conversation with Edward Snowden over Twitter lately, and it's pretty entertaining to watch. They're becoming fast friends on Twitter, and it's kind of surreal.
I'll have to go look at that. That's pretty funny.
So, completely aside, but just wanted to point that out there.
Late breaking news. This is almost like
That's right.
CNN. It's almost. I mean, we're covering Twitter stories.
This is Twitter News Network. It's not news. It's CNN. Oh, it's so true.
That's right. I don't know how you
Anyway.
ever know what's happening on Twitter without CNN.
This is why we should not podcast late during a work week day when we're both tired and worn out because we're just scattered.
That's right. I'm not scattered. What are you talking about?
Okay, then I'm scattered.
All right. So
Smothered and covered. For the southern folks, they'll get that joke.
you ain't Southern.
All right, moving on.
Moving
Sorry.
on. Our next story comes from ArsTechnica.com, and the title is "Hospital Pays $17,000 for Ransomware Crypto Key."
Now, wasn't this like 3.1 million last week?
Yes, in fact, it was. Well, I don't remember. I don't think it was 3.1. I don't remember the exact number, but it was millions of dollars last week. So we did talk about this last week, and I think at the time we made a bit of a joke because that number came from somebody who wasn't actually involved with the with the hospital. So apparently they didn't know what they were talking about. There was a couple of things that were interesting to me here.
So first of all, we're actually issuing a correction apparently because we quoted an incorrect story.
Yeah, that's true. We'll need to have like an errata section of the podcast from now on.
That might be longer than the full podcast. All right, carry on. All right, so
Yes.
background, if you don't recall, this hospital system got hit with a whole bunch of ransomware, and it was affecting their emergency room, their operations. It was on a whole bunch of systems. And the story was, at least last week, that it was millions of dollars to unlock the systems. And now, this week,
it was a 40 Bitcoin ransom, and they paid it,
which is the equivalent to $17,000 US.
That's right. And you know what? So there's a couple interesting things to me, and I know we speculated on this, or at least I speculated on this last week, and I think this is even more evidence that I may be onto something here. Apparently, this affected multiple computers, right? It's not very clear exactly how many. They basically said they took down their network, but we don't really have any sense of scale of how many computers there were. However, the computers were not being ransomed onesie twosie, right? They were.
Right.
This was a central. They were ransoming the organization, which, in the context of the story we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago with that Dell SecureWorks, and I know we're not going to talk about their speculation about it being a diversion. However, in that particular story, the idea or the concept was that somebody had broken in to some unnamed organization and was trying to push out a group policy to install ransomware on the endpoints of this computer or this organization, unnamed organization, and I'm wondering if this is becoming a thing, and if that's in fact what's happened here.
Well, I do think we're definitely seeing a pivot of ransomware instead of going after individuals, now starting to target corporations and enterprises. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is, So one thing, by the way, that we should just make clear is when they paid the Bitcoin, they did get their files back.
That's right.
The bad guys did give the decryption keys back, and they were back in operation.
And I think you said last week you had a really good point, which is, I mean, really surprising to me. But
it is. Are you sure it was me?
I think so.
Could have been your dog.
Maybe. Anyway. The topic or the theme was, that the millions of dollars in ransom was pretty exorbitant.
Right.
Exorbitant. Wow. And that I'm still stuck on saying absorbent. That's crazy. Where the hell did that come from? Anyway,
it's called getting old. It's called neurons in your brain misfiring.
Yep. So anyway, the deal was that in order for these things to work, people have to be willing to pay the ransom, right? It has to be a feasible amount of money, a reasonable amount of money, and $17,000 for an entire hospital, which according to the picture looks pretty big, to get back into business. It's a reasonable amount of money.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you're looking at millions of dollars, you might try a whole bunch of other things first.
Right.
When you're looking at 17,000, and we've got a quote here from the leadership. So I guess this went on for about 10 days, and the IT team and outside consultants were trying to get everything back up and running. But eventually the executives decided, quote, the quickest and most efficient way to restore a system's administrative function was to pay the ransom and obtain the decryption key. In the best interest of restoring normal operations, we did this. So, to be honest with you, at a purely executive level, I kind of get where they're coming from. I'm not saying that I'm not condoning or condemning, but I think if you're truly in trouble and the bad guys have a relatively good track record of coughing up the decryption key when you pay, 17 grand might look pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And the point is for the bad guys to stay within a range that is that reasonable transaction cost. If they get too greedy, I think that they will get shut down. They won't get paid.
Absolutely. And the other thing that makes me think that this is a very fundamentally different campaign than what we've seen attacking individuals is these keys apparently are not expiring. I mean, they're, in other the what I'll call residential or consumer previous ransomware campaigns, usually you get like 48 hours and then you're just out of luck. This one went on for 10 days. There's another story that I'm going to spring on you, which actually happened on the same day as this hospital, and it was a school district in South Carolina, I believe it was, the Horry County School District. It's Horry, and yes, I'm serious. That's what it's called.
Wow.
The Horry County School District agreed to pay $8,500 in bitcoins to uncryptolocker their data. And then there was, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a story of a township in the UK, I believe it was, that paid, and there's been a number of police departments in the US that have paid, and this is really getting to be a common thing, and I think that the problem I see is that with each one of these, it's paying, think about this like game theory, right? From the perspective of the individual, if you're the bank or the school district, it's almost a no-brainer, right? It's you pay a little bit of money. It sucks, right? You'll have to do without coffee or something. I don't know, but you're back up you're back in business. However, you're creating a moral hazard, right? Because now more and more of these criminals are seeing that this is just a great business to be in, and we already saw the Dridex team move in. They've retooled their banking Trojans to be cryptoware or ransomware. So I think this is going to just become disaster.
Yeah, no, it's going to get worse. It's funny. I've been talking about this with other organizations, and because I've been sort of seeing this pivot happen, and it's funny because some organizations I think are kind of in denial. They're like, "Well, we're not having a problem, so clearly our controls are effective."
Until they're not.
Right. And one thing that I'm thinking about is, and I haven't done any research on this, so I'm kind of dumb about this, but when you look at the home backup market, you've got online backup providers coming out the wazoo for, just basically idle online backup of any change data, and it's Automagic and idiot proof, and whether it's Mozy or Carbonite or Backblaze or whomever. I would start looking at, for your key personnel, doing something like that on their machines.
Yeah.
But the challenge there is you got to look at, if every time a file changes, it gets backed up. As soon as it gets encrypted, it's going to get backed up. So you've got to watch the versioning control on that really carefully and figure that piece out. But I think a lot of enterprises and organizations are looking at this from a server level, and a server backup and restore level, which is fine. But man, a lot of stuff happens on machines, on desktops and workstations and laptops.
Yeah.
So
yep.
I don't know that a lot of organizations have got a game plan around that yet.
Well, the interesting thing is we only hear about the ones that are highly public, and I suspect it's mostly the organizations that have some connection to the public sector that we end up hearing about this, because I suspect we don't ever hear about the ones who had a backup and didn't have to pay.
Right.
And we also probably don't hear about private companies who got hit and decided to pay, because
good question.
They don't have an incentive. Although the next story we have, actually, great way to segue, it comes from SC Magazine UK also, and the title is 44% of ransomware victims in the UK have paid to recover their data. Now that's the UK number. This is a report from Bitdefender. Now we talked a little bit about understanding who's writing the reports,
and we're really talking about consumer level, not necessarily enterprise level here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. Although I think in the actual report, they do cover, I believe, some organizations. But interestingly, the U.S. number was 50% of victims have paid, so even higher. The headline, or what was probably most newsworthy, is that the UK paid the most, so they were willing to pay the most money to get their files back. So, anyway, I have a feeling that the survey was completely unscientific, and they probably were
shocking.
They were probably asking people who were walking away from the Bitcoin ATM, did you just buy those Bitcoins to unlock your files?
P.S. We have a piece of software that'll help you.
That's right. Or not. Or not.
Well, it was interesting because I actually talked to Bob the other day, which I know you guys are still not talking. We're working on that. But he was telling me about a company he was working with where the executives are demanding anti-ransomware software. Sorry. And Bob was having a really hard time explaining to their executives that that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And the challenge, of course, is that the initial exploit could be of any variety, and the payload can be ransomware. So there is no one vector for ransomware. And this was very confusing, apparently, according to Bob, to the executives that he was talking to.
I can see how that would be confusing.
And
because, look, their marketing, it's Symantec. How could they not fix it? It's Bitdefender. How could they not detect this stuff, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Malwarebytes ran clean.
Right. Oh, hey, speaking of that, the other thing that was a little concerning about this one and some of the others we've talked about is it appears that they unlock their files and then run antivirus. And then, they just do Malwarebytes came back clean.
Oh, yeah.
Put it back in service.
No, please no. But I mean, to be honest, maybe, right? I mean, in all actuality, if you're a ransomware gang, you probably don't want to screw around too much more because you don't want to get a reputation of not doing what you're saying you're going to do, right? So if you left a whole bunch of other malware behind, you're going to get a bad rep, and then people may not pay in the future.
Well, I agree with that. However, if you've got a computer that's been owned by some malware, even if the the honor of your attackers is pure, what else did they click on? What else did that person who got infected click on?
Oh, fine, blame the victim now.
Yep, I'm a victim blamer. That's right. I'm a ransomware victim blamer.
Send your hate mail to Jerry.
But
copy me for the entertainment value.
in the case of the school, that I'll put the link to this school district. They give a little more information, and they said that the ransomware came in through an old server that was not maintained, and I got to thinking, okay, something doesn't sound right there.
Did you tell them to shut their hoary mouth?
No. Anyway, it kind of goes back to the point of you got to know what's on your network, otherwise you're going to end up paying some Bitcoin.
No kidding.
And our last story for today.
Not true.
Okay.
Because we've got a Norse Corp follow up that I want.
Oh yes, that's right.
Our second to last.
Our second to last story.
Yes.
Yep. This would have been a much bigger deal had we covered it over the weekend. But the title of this one is "Extremely Severe Bug Leaves Dizzying Numbers of Software and Devices Vulnerable." And this comes from Ars Technica, by the way. So I'm of course talking about the glibc earth burning vulnerability.
Whatever. It doesn't have a logo and a fancy name.
Yes. See, that was what, when this came out, people were running around freaking out. Oh my God, this thing it's terrible. There's even a proof of concept, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, where's the logo and what's the name? It didn't have either, and guess what? It's not all that bad.
There was a lot of confusion early on about how exploitable this would be. Well, go ahead and run through the story first, then we'll kind of talk about that.
Yes, sure. So this is a bug in a particular piece of code. It's the get name by adder, get adder info function, which basically lets you. And it's kind of funny because get adder info replaced a function that was vulnerable to the Ghost exploit last year. Right, but anyway, it's a function call in glibc, which is kind of like the nucleus of many Linux systems from a code perspective. It's not the kernel. It's commonly referenced in many different applications, and so when an application wants to, let's say, figure out how to get to google.com, it makes a call that ultimately gets to get adder info, and that gets ultimately passed into the DNS system. Well, it was vulnerable to a buffer overflow. Actually, a stack overflow, not a buffer overflow. There is a difference. And so this was found by Google and Red Hat and someone else. It was reported to Red Hat in the middle of 2015. It has a CVE number of 2015. But apparently, at the time, they didn't really understand either how exploitable. I think, this part gets a little unclear to me. It seems like Red Hat didn't understand that it was exploitable, and so the new news was that some Google researchers came along and apparently figured out how to exploit it. Now, Google released a proof of concept, which is basically just a denial of service, but it only works in very specific circumstances. Like you basically have to run your own name server that they provide you, which provides really, really messed up responses back.
Yeah, because wasn't there a bunch of theorization around this that because of many operating systems having things like address space randomization and a few other sort of built-in default OS level controls, that most common boxes weren't going to get popped by this unless they had very, very basic rudimentary protection.
Well, that's absolutely right. So most Linux systems these days have ASLR, which is address space layout randomization.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to remember.
And the purpose of that is so that it's basically to mitigate these kinds of bugs. And so,
Right.
if somebody exploits it, the worst thing that happens is it crashes, and okay, it's a denial of service. They don't own your data, and install ransomware. But anyway, so the way this normally works is, the attacker needs to figure out, okay, where when in this buffer or in the stack overflow, where does where am I writing, and then you craft some shell code that you have to feed into it, that ultimately resets the instruction pointer to some of the data that you have imported, which then starts running, and you can have all sorts of fun. The problem is that it's really, really difficult to do if there is ASLR, and even if there is ASLR, even if you can find that, my belief is that the exploits are going to be very platform dependent, right? So this is not like a Heartbleed or a Shell Shock type of deal where it's one little exploit line of exploit code is going to own everything. It remains to be seen if the exploits can traverse through a caching or an intermediate DNS server, which most end systems do. There's not a lot of endpoints that don't end up funneling through some DNS server.
Yeah, because they were thinking the most likely avenue of attack was going to be against a DNS server on this one.
Right. Now, the problem is that it is definitely true, but the nuance is that a lot of things make these DNS calls that aren't obvious, and so some of the proof of concepts were running sudo, because sudo will do a DNS lookup, and wget, which obviously does and on and on and on. So there were lots of lots of fun happening. But long story short, it's a bad one. It appears to be fairly well mitigated. However, Google still says, or at least implies, that they have a weaponized, and I use the scare quotes around weaponized version of the exploit that they're not releasing. When you read the wording of their press release, it doesn't actually sound like they have one to me. But some of the people involved...
Are you calling them liars?
No, I'm saying that the press release indicates that they don't have it, and other people have inferred things that weren't written. That's what I'm saying.
All right, then.
Anyway, but I think the bigger issue, potentially, is that this library is used everywhere on your home routers, and fortunately it wasn't used in Android phones. God knows every Android phone out there would never get patched ever. But
okay, Apple fanboy.
Well, no, I'm just bitter that Android doesn't have a good update ecosystem.
That's true. Okay, that's fair.
But there are a lot of embedded devices that A, don't get updates, and B, don't have ASLR.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones I think that are probably, if and when a reliable exploit mechanism is found, those are the ones I think that are really going to be hurting.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
I would agree.
So let's do our errata section and talk about Norse.
Well, it's not a errata; it's just an update.
Well, okay, fine, an update.
So just to catch everybody up, weird things afoot with Norse Corp, which is a well-known threat intelligence feed, and they have the nice little pew pew map that everybody likes. And they sort of seem to disappear and then come back and then disappear, and then nobody knew what was going on. So they fired the CEO, hired a new dude, and then basically Krebs came out and really had a pretty harsh article on them. And about a week and a half later, Norse Corp put out a press release basically firing back at Brian Krebs, saying, no, he's all wrong. And so it's interesting that they took A, this long to reply, and B, what they had to say. So first of all, the headline alone is epic. So here's the headline from the press release. Threat intelligence innovator Norse Corp releases findings of an investigative review uncovers serious errors in recent coverage of the company. So first off, they're the threat intelligence innovator. And clearly they've launched an investigation. Dun, dun, dun. And that investigation revealed errors.
They investigated themselves and found no problems.
So, the press release is kind of interesting, but in essence, they go through and try to refute a bunch of stuff that Brian said in his article, and try to dance around some things and sort of wordsmith their way through ways of denying things without necessarily fully denying things. And they address some allegations of these shell companies that Brian pointed out in his article of founders having this history of having shell companies and startups that sort of transferred resources amongst themselves and failed, and basically Brian was sort of alleging a bit of a shell game with these sort of backing of companies, this habitual. Sorry, a bit of a cold here. Habitual. I don't know, kind of alleged of habitual financial malfeasance going on amongst some of the early founders, and so the press release comes out and says, we're not associated with any. There's no relationship with these companies. We don't know what you're talking about. Norse Corp was founded by these people this date, and there was never any shell entities. We don't have any relationships with these people. So. It's interesting. And then they go, to set the record straight, this company changed his name to that company, and then somebody did work there for a little while, but then he did this. And so a lot of dancing going on in this. And, the short and long of it is I really feel that something very weird happened with Norse Corp. And then they, got their stuff together enough to keep going. I think they came very, very close to going under. And now they're kind of sort of having to address these allegations because customers, investors, and others are, worried about these things. And Brian Krebs has a tremendously strong reputation of being accurate and thoughtful and careful in his reporting. So they had to come out and do it. But, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but it's interesting how they rebut these things that Brian said, and it's worth going and reading. But I don't know. I still think Norse Corp is probably in some pretty serious trouble.
Well, yeah, I think the CEO more or less admitted as much. The outgoing CEO admitted some mistakes, and they had to let go of a bunch of people, and it definitely sounds like they have some revenue problems, but I get the feeling that they were kind of, I don't know for sure, right? But it seems like they were kind of pre-profit anyway.
Yeah.
And when you're pre-profit and you're burning through money, and your investors, you don't meet some milestones, and your investors start getting a little squirrely. That's bad. It can be really a bad thing. So it does seem like they've pulled through. There was certainly the really odd timing of the release of Brian Krebs' story, and then the apparent denial of service against their site, which took them down and kind of fed the rumor mill and fed into the whole the whole story or the whole you know, whatever, right? So
yeah, weirdness. There are a couple other quotes too that are kind of interesting. So, quoting from their press release, the article, and when they say the article, they're referring to Brian Krebs' article, repeatedly quotes former Norse employee Mary Landsman. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. A senior data scientist at the company. And if you go back and read Krebs' article, she has some pretty damning things to say. Kind of alleging that she was supposed to be the senior.
like the chief data, like the chief data scientist or something like that,
and could never get full access to the data and that sort of stuff.
right?
So the rebuttal of that is, quote, in her role, Ms. Landsman's access was limited to honeypot data. She never had access to core Norse technologies. Many of her comments are therefore not based on full understanding and awareness of Norse technical strengths and abilities. Now, what's weird about that is a lot of what Norse sort of sells themselves on is network taps and honeypots.
Right.
Now, so this is a weird play on words. I don't know if that means that they only let her see honeypots and not network taps. I don't know what that means. That's weird. To go on, the article quotes several other former Norse employees. Quote, while presented as facts, virtually all of the statements represented personal opinions.
Okay. It certainly seems like that's true.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily refute any of those opinions as accurate or inaccurate.
True. I do find it interesting, though, that Brian Krebs has not really responded at all. And I don't know if he's at some point. I don't know if he's double checking his sources or.
I don't know. I mean, this last section is pretty epic. Quote: we believe that Mr. Krebs' reporting relies heavily on drawing tenuous ties to past entities while glossing over Norse's unique intellectual property assets, undeniable technical strengths, strong competitive advantages, and overall market presence, Mr. Bain noted. That's the new CEO. Now, tell me, who is that statement targeted at?
Well, it's a press release. I mean, it's not a news story. That's a PR press release. Because at the bottom, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, it has the whole about Norse Corp, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on Business Wire. It's an absolutely press release. The quote goes on: we are aware of the challenges facing the company, and we are committed to making the changes necessary to overcome these obstacles. We ask only for a fair and comprehensive evaluation of the company as we pursue business opportunities and serve our mission to provide the best threat intelligence to a market that clearly needs superior security services. So, I'm not trying to slam Norse here. What I think is going on here is they almost went under. They got enough funding under them to continue on, and now they're having to clean up the mess. And this is very much targeted at future customers and future investors.
I think that's fair. I mean, not unexpected. I think any company in that position would react similarly, right?
It's just interesting to watch. I mean, my only other comment is that it's a little clumsy. They probably could have used some better PR around this, but they waited a really long time to put out statements they could have put out almost the next day.
That is true.
In my opinion, I mean, maybe they went and did
exhaustive
research.
I don't know. Maybe they did hire investigators and performed a thorough investigation.
So, I mean, it's really easy to armchair quarterback this, right, from the sides without really knowing anything. But it's kind of a crazy story going on in our industry. And, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I do hope that Brian Krebs would have done a little more homework than what they're alleging. But I don't know. I mean, it feels like I don't really know what the heck is real,
Do you think he got taken in by some really disgruntled former employees?
If you believe the narrative that Norse is trying to put out, yes, that is certainly the message. But
what do you think happened?
I don't really know. I mean, it certainly seems like the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I do think that when you have a startup like that, I don't think it was a small startup. I think it sounds like they had a fairly
Oh yeah.
significant number of people, and then they let off 30% of them right after Christmas. You're bound to get some unhappy people, and this is not huge. This is fairly small industry.
Yeah.
It's, so it's not inconceivable that somebody could play Brian. But I go back to it. It seems like, given the his reputation, to me at least, he would have done more due diligence, and that's why I still don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a tendency to give a benefit of the doubt to Brian because of his history and experience. But who knows? I mean, you bring up a viable point that maybe something odd did happen here. The other thing I would say is that everybody's got disgruntled ex-employees. I mean, stuff happens in business.
Right.
But if you've got yourself in a position where you're so vulnerable as a company that a couple of disgruntled ex-employees can hurt you this bad, you probably have some foundational challenges.
That's a good point.
I'm not saying it's fair or right or wrong. I'm just saying clearly Norse has got some challenges that they've got to get through. And,
Yeah. I wonder, too, and this is kind of getting into, business and philosophy somewhat more than security, but if it had to do somewhat with like a really badly timed sequence of events where they hit hard times profit-wise, they had to let go 30% of their workforce, they let go their CEO, a whole bunch of their board members, and I don't know who else, what other, maybe there was a leadership vacuum, and they were basically trying to hold the wheels on the wagon, and they're only now in a position where they can start dealing with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and why I think this matters, by the way, the reason we're covering this is not just for the gossip purpose, but threat intelligence as an industry and as an offering is something we're hearing a whole lot about right now. And it's, if you're paying a lot of money to a vendor, the viability of that vendor matters.
Yeah.
And the quality of their feed matters, right? And so if this is happening to Norse, it could or could not be indicative of a fundamental challenge with threat intelligence as an industry. I don't know that to be the case. So far, this seems to be isolated to Norse Corp. But for me, the jury's still out on whether or not these threat intelligence services are really all that useful. I really feel like, in general, threat intelligence feeds are something that you consume and maybe can get use out of when you've got almost everything else taken care of. And it's really rare to be at that level of maturity.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, come on, just get all your stuff patched first, and then we'll talk.
It does, certainly does seem like if you were to go to RSA or the summer camp this coming up in Las Vegas, I would bet you there's a lot of threat intelligence players, and I got to imagine it's more than the market can bear.
Oh, certainly.
And
that happens anytime you've got a new industry, with VC money chasing it. You're always going to get this sort of spin up of more than can survive.
Right, but I guess I think what's really interesting here is that threat intelligence is such an amorphous term. And an amorphous concept that there's going to be a wide variety of options and offerings from one company to another, and it seems like more than other industries that we've seen, there's probably going to be some mass extinctions in this industry as people start to realize what's useful and what's not useful, and some of these companies don't have a saleable product. So,
well, and typically what will happen is they'll get gobbled up by somebody else, right?
Yes.
There's always some book value typically for at least some of their intellectual property or their customer base or something.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I do think that's, to me, having been in the industry for a long time, it does seem like this is one of those industries that does not make sense as a standalone. It seems ultimately like it's going to be rolled up into something bigger. So anyway, I think that is the show for this week. Thank you very much, Mr. Kellett.
We're intentionally not talking about the Apple versus FBI thing. That's too political for us.
Yeah. Why do you hate America? Anyway.
Wait, no, see. But, I side with Apple. Okay.
Stop hiding terrorists in phones and we won't have this problem. Anyway, we will talk again next week. Thank you very much for listening. Just a reminder, the links to the stories we talked about are in our show notes on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. Thank you very much to those people who have donated to our Patreon campaign. We continue to be amazed at people's generosity. Thank you very much for that. If you enjoyed the show, give us some love on iTunes. That it always makes us feel good. It's like rubbing our ego. Not that needs to happen, but anyway. Yeah. And you can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will talk again next week. Hopefully, we'll be out on time next week. So take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.